Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for the 7th of October 2015, and joining me on this edition, our news editor Mark Hodgkinson.
My dad always said that there's 24 usable hours in every day.
And audio reviewer Ed Selley.
I don't feel I need to explain my art to you, Warren.
Welcome along. And before we go any further, just a reminder that the podcast, like Steve this week, will be taking a week's holiday, and we are not around next week. We're back on the 21st of October. Right, let's crack on with this week's show, and straight away, competitions. Mark, tell us what we can win.
It's good week for competitions, this. Right, first of all, we have an Android Shield TV from NVIDIA, which has come courtesy of Scan, and that one closes on the 6th of November, comes with a controller and everything. And we've also got a Denon AVR X2200 Dolby Atmos capable AV receiver, courtesy of Sevenoaks, and that one closes Tuesday the 20th of October.
And to join these competitions, where should people head?
avforums.com/competitions.
And moving on, previous winners, anybody?
Yeah, two previous winners, all recipients of Blu-rays, and we have forum regular Mooperman, who picked up Last of the Mohicans, and Enormous, that's not enormous, Enormous one, he got Beetlejuice.
Do you think that was a spelling mistake?
I don't know. It'd be a big spelling mistake looking at it closer.
Yeah.
I think it's deliberate.
Right. Well, well done to competition winners. And like Mark says, Android TV from NVIDIA and that Denon amp. Get yourselves in there and get the competitions won. Okay, so moving on. Let's start with an interesting story, because I can see both sides of the argument here. But Amazon have decided that they're going to ban selling other media streaming boxes, namely from Apple and Google. And this, you can see why.
Yeah, I mean, why in any way, shape or form assist the competition when you've got a fairly expensive platform to market and sell?
Well, the other flip of the coin is that, well, why doesn't Amazon put their streaming services onto these other boxes? Yes.
I mean, that I suppose is a more pertinent one, and I confess, I hadn't actually looked at it that way round, but I guess whether it's I mean, it sounds a bit sort of a peculiar thing to say, given that we were talking only a couple of weeks ago about the issues that Netflix has on the Fire TV stick in terms of juddering and stuff. But it could be as simple as just trying to ensure that that the service is as slick as it is possible to be, and that sort of lives or dies on the hardware, and just ensuring that they are using hardware that they're happy with and not having to make allowances for other people's.
Yeah, I suppose there is that. But other than Apple and Google, Mark, I noticed that Roku is still going to be for sale, yet Roku in the UK doesn't have Amazon Prime on it.
Yeah, it does in the US. I think this is a US-led story, isn't it? I'm not sure. It's likely, I guess, but they're definitely still in the Rokus. But that's never had the Amazon service in the UK.
My understanding is it's UK because it was on the BBC, wasn't it?
Oh well, yeah. Well, it's likely to be both, I would think. But it would seem very odd not to ban sales of the Roku 3 as well, because that's a complete direct competitor to the Fire.
Yeah, but it seems to be just these boxes that they are banning, because obviously if you look at other things like the Xbox, they're letting that go. Basically.
Yeah, I guess they're not looking at that as a direct competition. I mean, obviously, a games console's considerably more expensive than a Fire TV, so it's another £200 odd to get yourself one of those that will play Amazon content. So I guess it's not a direct competitor, and they're happy to let that go. Of course, they also sell an awful lot of them, so I'm guessing that's another reason why they're not banning sales on those.
I think that the only device I've seen that has everything on it, Netflix, Amazon, so on, Now TV, and is LG Blu-ray players.
LG Blu-ray players are the place to go, I think, if you want all the mainstream streaming services in one place. And they do Spotify as well, so for less than £100, you've got yourself a nice little media box that plays discs.
But
that's how I looked at the last Blu-ray player I reviewed, really.
But is that going to last? Because are we going to see Amazon turning around and saying, "Oh, by the way, we're withdrawing our app from these other devices, and you can only get"?
Well, we've seen it happen already on the older LG kit, so yeah, it could happen. But I don't think I can't see an LG Blu-ray player really cannibalising sales of the Fire TV. It's in a different category on Amazon for one. So yeah, people that don't know that the LG players do all that probably won't be looking into the possibility that they do, if you see what I mean.
I guess the other way of looking at it is, and Ed touched on this, the hardware side of things. Does Amazon want their app running on a box which can't handle the quality that they want to get across with the streaming services?
They're happy enough to release an Amazon app for Android devices, so that wouldn't seem to be the case because there's no more unpredictable platform than that.
Okay.
Yeah, but isn't it one thing? Sorry, again, we're having problems with sentences. Do they offer the full range of sort of services and features on that app, or do they sort of cut it back? Because
it's cut back depending on your device. Yeah,
you do find with Android apps that they often miss features out that are added to iOS and the like, simply because for every person brandishing a Galaxy S5 or whatever, or something equally pacey, there's someone with a 3-year-old huddle with dementia, and that it's just not going to do it.
Yeah, there's a limited number of well-supported Android devices that get HD and all the rest of it, and all the nice treatment, and the rest just get standard def crap.
What about the set-top boxes and PVRs these days? I mean, I know it's the BT box does Netflix and so on, but is Amazon on any of these boxes?
Not that I'm aware of. Netflix is on YouView as well. I don't think Amazon's on any of those platforms.
Right. So basically what they're trying to do here then, Ed, is push the Fire TV as the only place to really get this service when it comes to a small streaming box.
That would appear to be it. Now, what we don't know, historically, Amazon have been more Google than Apple in this regard. They, I don't think they've ever seen fit to try and make any significant money off their hardware, and nothing on the pricing of the Fire TV suggests that it's going to make them a fortune. But whether it's a case of just ensuring that they maximise that, but then also just mainly push their own ecosystem, I guess, short of kidnapping Jeff Bezos, I don't know if I'm going to find that out.
No, I can't see them making a great deal of profit on the hardware, but they might turn a small profit for the volumes they sell it in. But it's all about keeping you in Amazon. Don't touch that dial. Buy everything here.
Yeah.
The Fire TV is out this week, is it? Today at the time of recording, the 5th of October. You got one on order?
Yes.
I don't personally.
Naturally, I've got one on order.
You have, Mark, have you?
I have.
To go with your jelly beans.
To go with my jelly beans and my large collection of batteries.
Looking forward to getting this in. Do you think it'll be a bit of a game changer?
Game changer? No, I don't think it'll be a game changer. The original Fire TV was more of that. It's just an improvement and extension on what's already there. So not a game changer, but certainly should be a cracking little box. Okay,
and NVIDIA have released their Shield Android TV. One whisking its way as we speak to you for review. Mm-hmm. Is this a game changer?
Could be. It's a souped-up version of the Fire TV to all intents and purposes. It's got 4K capability, but it does it up to 60 frames per second. So and it's got Netflix 4K service as well. Obviously, it hasn't got Amazon and won't have. It's got direct integration with, the Kodi developers are produced special versions for it. It does 23.967 frames per second properly, apparently. It is with the latest update, it can support 7.1 HD audio, which the Fire TV cannot. It's got a much more powerful processor, and you can even stream PC quality games from your NVIDIA gaming rig, and they're also launching a Netflix for games style, I think it's called GeForce, game streaming service with some apparently 1080p PC quality streaming available. It has got 3 gigabytes of RAM compared to 1 gigabyte of RAM in virtually all the rest, so it'll be lightning fast. It's got an SSD drive on the 16 gigabyte model, so that should make it extra silky. It's got 2 USB 3 ports, micro SD card slot. Comes with a fully functional game controller of console quality by the looks of it, and you can get it for 150 quid. So it's £70 more than the Fire TV, but if you want the ultimate in performance, it's looking like the way to go.
And of course, you're going to have both these boxes. Bit of a head-to-head coming up.
Definite head-to-head. Would be rude not to, I think, with them in the same release window and being in the house at the same time. So yeah, there's a for sure head-to-head.
Proper death match.
Proper.
Which one would you go for, Ed?
I would. This is not a cop-out answer. I want to see Mark's findings, not least because I don't have very much experience at all with these Android TV boxes. So, firstly, I want to see if the NVIDIA is a straightforward and easy to follow piece of equipment. Then I'll approach it with an open mind. I will choose whichever one he anoints as the best.
It doesn't come with a standard remote. It only comes with the game controller, which I find slightly odd. If you want the remote control, that's another 40 quid.
Can
40
you
quid
just
for a remote?
Is there an app for other devices for control?
Presumably, there will be some. I don't think there's a dedicated app. Certainly, no mention of it.
No, you see that I have to be honest. That would be an issue. So remote controls. I don't know what it's like. If you think back to these dark days, Mark, remote controls in my house, they're in a drawer because otherwise they would be destroyed. Essentially, everything has to be controlled off an iPad, or it's doomed. So
that's an unknown to me, to be honest, Ed. I'm not sure. As far as my research goes, which has been quite extensive since June, I can't remember seeing any mention of an iOS app or indeed an Android app for control. So no, and I don't think our games controller is clearly not a favourable device for controlling a TV box. They're obviously big on selling this gaming capability with it, but obviously it's
well. Just think back to the dark days of using PS2s for DVD and PS3s for Blu-rays, trying to control them with the.
It's not right, is it?
Well, actually, with the PS3, it was 10 quid for the remote.
This is true, but if you remember, the PS2 remote was frighteningly expensive, and it used one of your memory card slots from unless my memory fails me, which
right. I didn't have a PS2 for DVD.
But I never bought a PS2 remote, so I was there with the controller going, no, not that button. Oh, I've gone back to the start of the film. Bah.
Yeah, I'm a bit surprised with the pricing on the remote, to be honest.
Yeah, it does seem a little bit steep, that, because it's nothing special, is it?
It looks nice enough, but it's just a standard Android TV remote setup, small and simple. So yeah, I find it a bit odd.
Bit like Steve, small.
Bit like Steve,
small
and simple, and odd.
If it's me, I think at the minute, I think the Fire TV would do everything I need.
What about the 24p support, though? We don't know that on the Fire TV, and we know that.
Well, we'll
that's why I'm waiting for your in-depth, well-researched, and beautifully comprehensive review.
He's only been researching it since 2009.
Since the first heard a rumour. I've been itching for this one. I'm really quite excited.
You might want to get that looked at if you've been itching since 2009.
I have got eczema.
So the big story 2 weeks ago, Ed, in the car industry was VW being rather naughty and rather dishonest with their defeat devices when it came to emissions testing.
Yes.
That was a big story, created a hell of a lot of interest on the net, lots of clicks and a lot of clickbaited and so on. So I guess it wasn't any surprise that The Guardian, somebody at The Guardian thought, oh, what else could we look at to try and get clicks, and came up with the Samsung story, which hit last week, which was a bit of a non-story, really.
Yeah, it's not quite the same thing, is it?
No, it's definitely not.
Not at all.
It lives or dies on the small print, doesn't it? In the same way that this is less of an emissions cheat, as the same way as when a car has its stated fuel economy tested, they don't drive it up and down a 1 in 3 slope in second gear. It's as simple as that. You do incredibly gentle arcs at 56 miles an hour. Yes, of course, if you're going to do an energy test, you're going to do it in the most efficient mode of the television, in the same way that my A-rated washing machine presumably didn't earn that whilst it was doing a boil wash. It's just standard clickbaity gash. Okay, so
bring everybody up to speed, Mark, with this story.
Okay, so The Guardian published some findings of a report from Compliant TV, which is an organisation partly funded but not part of the European Commission's Intelligent Energy Europe body, whatever they are. And they're obviously the people who are responsible for sanctioning TV's energy measurements and what have you. And basically, Compliant, although this report is not even published yet, so we'll have to wait and see exactly what it says, has accused Samsung of detecting their energy tests, which is a 10-minute sequence of video of various speeds of movement and brightness levels, with an average picture level of 34. And the whole crux of it is that they think the motion lighting control on Samsung is a non-out-of-the-box setting. So they switched it off to do their measurements, and lo and behold, they found that the TV was consuming more energy than in normal use than it did with their test. But of course it did. You turned off a function that helps save energy, which is on by default. Let us stress that, because Samsung aren't hiding anything. The setting's there for everyone to turn on and off should they wish, but it is for a fact on as it comes out of the box. And Compliant TV turned it off for the testing. So it seems a slightly strange shifting of the goalposts by Compliant to even state this. So it's complete nonsense.
Yeah, of course it is. I mean, the same bodies which basically killed Plasmoff as well because of the amount of power that was being used and wasn't efficient enough and so on. Yet, the power figures that you always used to get in the back of plasmas, those were maximums, and you very rarely hit a maximum.
No, and strangely, I looked at the report that this originated from. The story originated from. It's a 100-page PDF document of mammoth boringness, but there was 14 pages dedicated to plasma TV, and that backs in a lot of graphs that back up what you're saying there, Phil. But it was done in 2014, by which time they'd already killed off the plasma TV industry. So, what was the point in that?
Well, I mean, from our point of view, we'd always tell people switch eco off. If you want the best in picture quality, it takes a certain amount of energy for the panels, and we're talking about LED, LCD TVs here, for them to produce a half decent image, and we'd always go picture quality first before energy saving. And looking at somebody like Ed, who's probably got amplifiers running and all sorts.
Yeah.
I take it energy consumption is not a big thing for you, Ed.
I don't know. You see, I generally just turn everything off when it's not running. Even the name stuff, which you can only turn off at the back panel because I don't believe in standby controls. The only things that generally run all the time in this house are the routers and NAS drives, because obviously they have sort of constant pickup. But I actually always sort of confuse people on this. I'm kind of a bit up on sort of energy conservation and things. So I don't believe in essentially warm up times, with the noble exception of valve amplifiers, of which I don't own one permanently. I find the amount of time between something turning on and sounding as it's supposed to sound is never more than about 5 or 6 minutes, and that's something with a really big power supply. For stuff with smaller power supplies, it's a couple of seconds.
Yeah, I used to run a CRT projector on my ceiling. The amount of juice that thing took, and you had to leave that for 30 minutes to warm up. Then you had to check the convergence before you did anything. It wasn't a case of switching on, sitting down and watching a movie. There was a whole routine that you had to go through. And the older power amps, I mean, the amount of energy we used to use compared to now. And yet they're complaining about a Samsung TV, which I think maximum mark would be about 130 watts anyway in the brightest setting.
Yeah, it would be.
Compared to 400 on a plasma.
Yeah.
What were old CRT tellies like? I can never remember. I mean, they used to be significantly high voltage. I mean, you didn't want to go anywhere near the tube, but like that. What was the sort of go-to consumption on some of the last sort of widescreen CRTs? That must have been fairly high.
Yeah, you've got to imagine that it's a damn sight higher than an LED TV.
Oh, of course, my fridge runs all the time on account of it being a fridge.
And full of beer.
No, actually, whilst as I mentioned,
no, it's a Monday, so it won't be full of beer now.
A mild hangover at the moment, because it was my wedding anniversary.
You're not doing Stoptober?
Am I bollocks? No, I'm not drinking in the week.
It's very big of it.
Well, yeah, I know. It's a fairly significant sacrifice. But no, there is no beer in the house. Well, there's beer in the downstairs loo, sort of the ale.
Secret stash in the system.
No, just all of the sort of brown beers that need to be stored at room temperature live in the downstairs loo. I'm in a good place with it.
I kind of thought you would have a hangover seeing all the trophy points appear on my Twitter feed last night.
And actually, no, I was checking. I was actually I hadn't updated that for ages, so I was just putting stuff in because my normal phone's off for repair. So I was just putting in old entries. I didn't consume them all in the space of 3.5 minutes, Phil. I mean, I probably could, but no, I didn't.
Anyway, so wrapping up on this, Samsung, the whole energy thing, there wasn't just Samsung. I don't know how they got named in this, Mark, because it wasn't
I think
named
just because they're the biggest TV manufacturer. That was another thing in the story. It said Samsung Guardian's wording, something to the effect of Samsung weren't named in this report. But yeah, one of the guys from Compliant TV mentioned them in an interview, so maybe that's why. But yeah, it's doubtful that they're the only ones who have these energy saving features on by default that the Compliant TV won't regard as out of box setting.
Well, I think we can genuinely say that normally is the case. When you take it out and you put it in home mode, you have to go and switch all the eco stuff off.
Yep. I think that's always the case these days.
Yep. Okay. Case. So a bit of a non-story, that one.
Very much a non-story.
So let's move it from vision to sound. And we're not going to do movies this week because Steve's not around. We don't know what's at the cinema. But we want to do things a little bit differently this week because we're going to have a break next week. So we're going to do a little bit more audio focused. And I guess the first thing that I want to ask you, Ed, because it's something that gets mentioned all the time, and I've had speaker manufacturers even tell me this. A speaker is a speaker, so it'll work well for movies as well as music. Discuss.
I think, don't get me wrong, ultimately you are seeking to reproduce a sound wave as it is produced and sent to the loudspeaker. It doesn't really matter whether that's music or dialogue effects, so on and so forth. You're just seeking to do this as accurately as possible. So on a base sort of engineering level, there is some mileage in that, and there are undoubtedly some loudspeakers which are just peerless at doing almost anything that you could ask for them. I think where it gets complicated is the different demands that an AV system places on a loudspeaker in terms of the material it's being fed in the first place. There is a more credible argument for you looking to either split those roles and responsibilities or come down and decide on which side of the fence you want to fall. I mean, it's little things like if you... I have to be honest, with a reasonable subwoofer, it doesn't necessarily have to be a particularly expensive one in my experience. I mean, that BK I reviewed recently is less than £400, and I feel is more than up to the task of doing this. Even if I were in possession of a set of full range loudspeakers, I'd probably still dial in a physical limit to their low end and hand over everything to the subwoofer. And with that in mind, whereas I would definitely be looking for something that is as near as damn it a full range speaker for music, because I'm not a big fan of 2.1. I have no such qualms about using a much smaller speaker for AV and handing over to a dedicated sub.
Now, you see, I find that strange because you looking at your music taste and some of your playlists and stuff, there's a lot of dance music in there, Ed, where I would have thought, a good extension with a good fast subwoofer is what you're looking for.
Yeah, except the problem is that I kind of spoilt everything for myself by some years ago. The speakers that I now own and use all the time, a pair of neat Momentums, they were sent to me as part of a complete system for a review. And it was unfortunate, and I think as reviewers we may all have had a moment of this. It's a sudden nagging realisation that there is no way that you can you might have to send the review samples back, but there's no way you can't not have that in your life after that point. And so it was for me with those speakers. There is, I listened to plenty of subwoofers. The only one that just had the same absolute stop-start accuracy as those Neat speakers was the Eclipse unit, which was $5,000. So it's weird. It's desperately subjective, and it, in no small part, also I will freely concede, is down to my room, where for the most part now subs have to be at the back of the room rather than the front. So there is always slight. I mean, I know all the comments about omnidirectional behaviour and that like, but that it's now it's not anything like as I just find that I'm not on axis, and it just doesn't sound right, as opposed to having two speakers in the right place.
You're obviously having some issues with directional effects there within the room, which I guess
this is true. I mean, this is one of the reasons in reviews I get particularly keen on any subwoofer that has a fully variable phase control. That's ideal for me, because it's not a simple case of it either being at 0 or 180 degrees of phase. For where the general sub position is, you're actually looking for something not exactly between those 2 points, somewhere just sort of past a sort of 90-degree phase shift. So yeah, that's ideal, but it's still just not the same as having 2 points of sound which are towed in to produce a stereo image, and everything's coming from that image. I mean, it's interesting because when I joined the forums a million years ago, the package I was using downstairs was the Mordant Short THX pack, the THX 500 series, and they had active subs built into the bottom of the front towers. And actually, whilst you lost out on absolute depth, just the way the cabinet was, they would never go unbelievably low. It did, for the most part, solve that issue for me, and I was never so bothered with those. But I've never not had anything that replicates that setup since.
This is one of these things, and like I say, I mean, I've had manufacturers, telling me, how does a speaker know it's a hi-fi speaker or a home cinema speaker and so on. But there are speakers that are designed for each role, and I'm thinking here specifically about, like you mentioned, THX certified speaker packages. Well, a lot of those, under the old THX package, was all about dispersion characteristics from the main speakers, which sometimes made it very difficult, because of the way they're designed, to get a proper 2-channel stereo image from them. They were very, very difficult to get a good stereo image from, because of the way the dispersion characteristics worked, where the speakers tried not to send sound reflections to the ceiling and the floor, for example, to cut down on reflections and reflected sound. Sounds great with movies, because a lot of these speakers, and I'm thinking packages like the XTZs or the M&Ks recently that I looked at, substat systems, the sound I would describe, and it's a sound that I like personally, and that's a studio, natural, you hear everything, a very neutral speaker, a very something that doesn't add any warmth or any coloration to the sound whatsoever. What's recorded is what you get back. Genelec sound, for example, M&K sound like that. The XTZs, they have a little bit of warmth to them, but very much so. And the reason that they work so well for movies is because it's so crisp, so clear, the attack's there. So when you get things like somebody unloading a clip through a 9mm, you hear the tinkle of the the casings as they hit the floor. It has that ping, and where these speakers sometimes fall down with music reproduction is when you get to those kind of frequency levels, and say it's a female voice, it gets very sibilant. So the thing that I've noticed, Ed, and you can either back me up or tell me I'm talking rubbish here, is I tend to notice that the speakers that are designed for music playback, they have a roll-off at the very high end, and usually a roll-off at the bottom end, which makes them very neutral. And when I say neutral, it's not in the studio sense, it's in the sense that they'll sound good with any crap that you put through them, basically. They'll have a certain performance level.
Well, there are undoubtedly speakers on the market that do that. I've got a pair of audio now speakers, which, rather more by the nature of how they're designed, just the physical construction of them, do have definite roll-off. But I would say that it's increasingly uncommon in terms of anything above sort of absolute budget level to find stuff where there's certainly a significant treble roll off these days. That's fairly unusual. I mean, the last two pairs of stereo speakers to go through for AVForums, the PMC 2021, and that review's already up, and then done the KEF LS50. That review will go up in the next couple of weeks. Both of those are very clear. Well, I mean, I confess that this is not based on an in-room measurement. It's based just on listening to them in a room with which I'm utterly familiar against other items. It didn't strike me that there was any reduction in their high frequency output. They obviously have a reduction in their low frequency output because both of them are bookshelf loudspeakers, and thankfully the practice of setting up bookshelf loudspeakers so they hit some sort of artificial low frequency point, but that had nothing to do with, there was a sort of massive gap until the rest of the output sort of stabilized again. That seems to have ended, but the roll off there is simply the laws of physics, rather than a deliberate undertaking.
I guess the point I was trying to make is that some of these in quotes hi-fi speakers do roll off the high frequencies.
Some do. But I would argue that there's less and less of them. It's more of a specific sort of design undertaking these days.
But is that because manufacturers are going for a sound for their product? Because I've heard it said a few times, and sometimes you can pick the speaker out when you hear it. There are some manufacturer speakers that sound a certain way. They have a certain warmth, a certain sound to them.
Yeah, but there are other ways. There's more than one way to skin a cat. To quote the curious saying of my mother in this regard, something as simple as the material that you make the tweeter out of is going to, one, alter its output, not hugely, but at certain points in its frequency response, it's going to have resonant points at different points depending on what it's made out of, how it's mounted, so on and so forth. But I mean, whilst it's a glib and stereotypical thing to say that metal tweeters sound brighter, there is inarguably something about the difference between that and a silk dome, where if you actually measure their outputs, it comes down to being, nothing that you can really pick out in a decibel sense, but the metal unit can often sound quite a lot sort of physically harder and more strident than a well sorted soft dome. And then this is then replicated in different materials to make the actual mid-bass drivers out of. I mean, I would agree with you that there's a certain sound. I mean, whether it's sort of reinforced by voicing them as well, but I could swear to you that under normal circumstances you could almost always pick out that sort of Kevlar weave driver that Burroughs and Wilkins is such a huge fan of.
I was going to say that B&Ws, I can tell B&Ws, and I owned a pair for a long time, and it's just that sound. I can pick it out in a room, no problem. But you see, when I go, if I was speccing a room or I was looking at designing a system or putting a system together nowadays, because it's quite movie heavy, I would be going for a very neutral speaker, something like an M&K, something like an XTZ. There's really dynamic, not a lot of warmth there, not a lot of added manufacturedness sound or voiced in a certain way, but playing back exactly what it should be playing back. Where do you stand when you're looking at speakers personally?
It's an odd one because there's a degree of contradiction, because I generally speaking am after a fair, something which is fairly neutral by all accounts. But then I have to square that away with the fact that I then spent my own money on a pair of loudspeakers which is they are voiced entirely by the subjective preference of the man who owns the company and his design team. So whilst the result to me sounds pretty damn neutral, and then also when they've been compared against speakers where there is a huge amount more hard science involved. I mean, let's face it, PMC have been firing lasers at their speakers in the last couple of years for some sort of hyper accurate distortion measurement. they do sound pretty much down the line. So there is obviously a degree of contradiction, but equally, and this sort of came into the comments thread. There are films with soundtracks which are pretty poor, but by and large, they're done under certain conditions, and they're pretty consistent. Music isn't like that, and I couldn't have a system where I stopped listening to bits of my own personal library because it was busy being torn to shreds. I'm relatively lucky. I don't have that many poor recordings in my collection. But if you are a huge fan of, the output of Trojan Records, for example, there's a hell of a number of great albums on the Trojan Records back catalogue, but there's rather less in the way of great recordings. So you're going to need to have a speaker which is intrinsically forgiving. Otherwise, you're just writing off your own music collection, and that's not. I'm sure that if we think, if we think about it, I can't think of a Blu-ray soundtrack I've listened to that wasn't pretty good. I'm sure that there must be a Blu-ray.
Oh yeah, there's a few of them out there. But I guess the question is, do you want to hear it how it's supposed to be? Which is,
I don't think that's so much of a problem with films. I would agree with you that's a fine way of doing it, because the material, by and large, is amenable to that happening. I would just counter that with music. Where there's a hell of a lot more older technology involved in mastering, and then there's been some fairly savage commercial restrictions on how stuff has been mastered. This is less important. The requirements are different.
So you'd be looking for a speaker that's basically going to cover up the cracks.
I couldn't have a speaker that simply rendered albums that I love unlistenable, simply so high quality lift music sounded a bit better. That's just me. Well, I don't think it's just me. I think there's quite a few of us that think that way. But it
is interesting though how we differ. Yeah, we have a love for probably about the same type of music.
Well, yes
same
and no.
genres.
Ironically, a lot of older electronics music and older electronics music in particular was extremely well mastered and well recorded. For me, problem areas of music, sort of my music collection, is much more if you've got albums, anything that was done by any sort of American rock act towards the tail end of the 90s, start of the 2000s, will have been compressed to buggery.
Yep.
Where I really like an album, I will often try and if I bought it on CD and I've liked it, I'll often see if I can hunt down a vinyl copy, simply because it can't be cut as hot, so often it's better behaved. But equally, you've just got to sort of grin and bear it. Those albums are they're not. I'm not going to stop listening to them. I need to be able to accommodate them. Ironically, I was saying earlier, most electronics albums, there are some notable exceptions, aren't bad at all. Actually, you could get by with pretty revealing bits of equipment. Yeah,
well, that's just the sound I'm used to, and I'm used to using a sub with everything. So even the General X here on the editing system, there's a Velodyne sub on the end of them. In the cinema room, there's 4 subs running, and I'll do that for music as well, because it's to me that's a full range system. It covers everything.
Just we get familiar with a certain way that things go. One of the more interesting sort of ones for home audio is I'm quite happy to tolerate a less sensitive loudspeaker, because by and large the amplifiers that I like have reasonable power outputs and plenty of current delivery, so that's fine. Whereas a very large number of my friends are huge advocates of very, very sensitive loudspeakers and much, much lower powered amplifiers.
Yep.
And there is certainly something to that presentation. It's incredibly immediate. And there is, I can see why it's it's popular. I just prefer the sort of more heavily damped, proper sort of grip that you get with reasonable solid state output and slightly less sensitive speakers.
Yeah, and of course, when it comes to audio, it's different to video. Video, it has standards written down, and its standards are there. Everything can comply with that, and you'll get the same performance, or you should get the same repeatable performance. When it comes to music, music's very personal. Very personal. More personal, I would say, than film. It almost like comedy, you know. It's very personal to you, what you like, what you dislike. And I would say the same about audio. You know, that's why there are standards there that say speakers should be at this height and blah, 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 and blah. But when it comes to actual standards that recording studios would follow through, well, none of them do it the same, you know.
No.
None of them at all. I mean, the ones I've been in Abbey Road Studios a number of times. I've been at Air Studios a number of times, and a few other studios. They're running bell wire with the microphones. You know what I mean? There's none of this expense or you know, a lot of the mixing desks are from the 1950s and 60s that they're using, and they're using them because they have a certain sound.
Yes.
That they can't get with modern day mixing desks and so on. It's why they keep these things, and it becomes very, very subjective and very personal. And I guess this is where it feeds into the forums, because it makes the forums really interesting, because you can have these discussions. You know, like I say, we like more or less the same type of music. Yeah, I will always run a subwoofer in my system, even if it was in stereo. A couple of bits, I would have a sub. I'd have a 2.1 system always. That's the way I would run it. You would do it differently, and
yeah.
And this is where you get your personal taste and your subjectiveness and all the rest of it. And it's a shame that, you know, and I think, Mark, you'll agree, because you do a lot of these soundbar reviews, and there's some soundbars out there that are really good, but you're paying quite a bit of money for them. Whereas at the end of the day, if you went out and bought a pair of speakers to use as monitors with your TV, you get better stereo separation, and you're going to get better sound quality.
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably get like a scratch record at the end of the soundbar review saying, look, do you know if you go and spend 300 quid on a pair of active stereo speakers, you'll get a much better performance than 300 quid on a soundbar? But it's true. I mean, I ended up buying, going back to Ed's point, I ended up buying a pair of little desktop speakers that were review samples, purely because I loved them so much. And I've never bought a soundbar, so I might tell you something. And I think another point, appropriate to your discussion I've just been listening to, it would be I probably tend to listen a bit harder when it's music. Tend to be a bit more critical. It's a bit more of a solitary, non-distracted event on those occasions. Where
let's face it, with film, you have, there are very few circumstances where you're not concentrating as much on the image.
Well, the whole point of film is, if it's done correctly and the soundtrack is done correctly, you don't notice it.
Yeah.
You're taken into the experience, and anything that stands out and is noticeable takes you out of the experience. So for film, definitely that's. But music's different, you know. Music.
Well, it
exactly,
is and it isn't. You do get one of the things that immediately signifies if I quite like something is when I get to the end of doing everything that comes in. By and large, will go through before obviously listening.
You soak it.
Continue. Well, not just that. Once I'm content that it's going to sound as it's going to sound for the rest of the time there, I'll spend about 2 hours, and it's not a fixed catalogue of music that I go through, but it's from a defined set of bits and bobs.
So it's not Thomas the Tank Engine's greatest hits.
It's not Thomas the Tank Engine. But one of the things that immediately determines if something's pretty damn good is that after 2 hours, if there's not much in the way of listening notes, that's a very good sign. Because I haven't taken myself back to the business of critically analysing it. I've just sat there going, yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
I get that from time to time. The last thing that did that was the hilarious £10,000 record player that I was talking about a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, you would expect it to be pretty impressive for the not inconsequential asking price. But yeah, I finished a sort of 2 hour test run of bits and bobs, and my notes could have been written on the back of a stamp, basically. It took me to whatever I happened to be playing at the time. It was a window into the music to do the stereotype, but it was fantastic.
See, if that happens with me, Ed, I start to panic because I've got nothing to write about.
Yeah.
Well, no, then you need to revisit. Having done that in that initial listening session, I'll then have to come back. Do you know one of the easiest ways I get round this is going back to, I mean, I am fortunate enough, in full disclosure, that every month a high-res music download site, as part of being on the press list, you get 4 albums a month in high-res from these people. And by and large, it's a collection of staggeringly good recordings of music that I honestly couldn't in any way, shape or form get remotely excited about. So if I've been getting a bit lost in the moment with music for which I am sort of, fond of, the logical thing you have to do is step back and start using material with which you're very familiar but you couldn't get desperately excited about, because that you can then detach yourself from what's actually going on and start to work out what the piece of equipment is actually doing. I even own 1 or 2 records for the express purpose of doing this.
I guess what we're saying is it's personal, it's subjective, it's audio. That's what kind of expect. There are different speakers for different occasions. They are voiced differently. They are warm. You'll get some that just play back what's there in the recordings. What do you like? What is your what's your opinion on this? What is it that you like from a set of speakers? Will you go probably like me or Steve, right in the middle and have something which is going to give you exactly what you're looking for because it's so neutral and so unlike the video chain? Or are you quite partial to B&W sound? Or do you have a favourite manufacturer because you like the way that the speakers are voiced or so on? Give us your opinions. Let us know what you think. And I guess, Ed, we're kind of looking at where we're going to take the reviews for the next 12 months. So give us some ideas of what you want us to have a look at when it comes to speakers, when it comes to audio. What are the big burning questions for you? What are the brands that you want to know more about and want to know more about the products? Leave everything in the feedback section underneath this podcast in the podcast forum, or you can tweet us at AVForums and let us know, and we'll come back to this one in a few weeks and hopefully answer some questions and have a look at where we can take this subject. We're going to have a quick break and we'll be back in a second. Now, normally we go to movie news on this section of the podcast, but this week we're going to do things slightly different because Steve's not here, he hasn't been to the cinema, and we don't have any reviews lined up of films. So instead, I wanted to hand it over to Ed, because one thing we haven't done on the podcast, Ed, is actually we talk about music, we talk about 2-channel, we talk about streaming and so on. But what we don't talk about is where are the best sources for music if your love is music and you want to stream or you want to download and so on. So I guess you're the biggest audiophile on this podcast, but you're the only one this week. So where do you go, apart from being drunk and on eBay and buying vinyl, where do you source your music from, and where do you think are the best places to collate your music?
In terms, essentially, for me, there are 3 main locations where I buy physical media from. It's not an absolute, but I would say between these 3 sites, they account for well over 90% of what I buy. You did mention eBay. eBay is one of those, although eBay has been on a downward trend for me in terms of material I bought from them. And I believe the reason for that is because of the site I'm now going to say as the second of the 3, and that's Discogs, which is just an online music marketplace, and it really has taken a large chunk of eBay's sort of thunder in this regard, because it's easier for them to update for an independent store to update, basically have their entire catalogue listed on Discogs without listings time expiring or anything like that. And for all physical media, not simply vinyl, for CD, if you're going a bit mad and buying cassettes, or you suddenly feel sentimental to try and chase a long lost album down on minidisc, Discogs is the place to do it. You can search in pretty much any field that you need. Either you can search for a specific album, search for a specific artist, record label, or you can just bring up the inventory of a particular shop that uses it as a sales point. And it's a brilliant spread between, there's plenty of new material, as in unused brand new material, and obviously a huge back catalogue of used CDs and vinyl on it as well. Functions by PayPal, and by and large, it works extremely well. Mainly, there's a nature. I don't know why it makes a difference, because let's face it, if eBay feedback rating is the eBay feedback rating, but it just seems that companies are less willing to take any risks with their reputation on Discogs. And I have to be honest, every single transaction I've done on it has been absolutely flawless. So I wholeheartedly recommend it, not simply if you're into analog. It's absolutely brilliant for CD as well. And then finally, boo, hiss, etc. But yeah, Amazon has got everything. And because I've accidentally signed up for a year of Prime membership, it turns up the following day as well. So, in all seriousness, if you're after a piece of new release material and, you are either content or resigned or unconcerned about whether we feel Amazon is busy destroying everything or not, or avoiding tax obligations, whatever, Amazon has got absolutely everything. And it's going to turn up. If there's a problem, they're going to sort it out straight away. So those three sites for my physical media requirements are pretty much the whole deal. But I mean, if you'd asked me that 18 months ago, eBay and Amazon would be tying at the top, with Discogs occasionally sorting me a rare purchase. Yeah. Over the last year and a half, Discogs has just powered away. It is a truly phenomenal site, and they have, as a side requirement, a mission statement, much like IMDb, which originally started as a crude list of fit actresses, has become an absolutely extraordinary reference. Discogs has the stated aim of logging every commercially released piece of music that there has ever been.
Excellent. That's something I'm going to have a look at, because there's the last CD I bought, which would have been 18 months ago, was Back to the Future soundtrack, but it was one that had never been released.
Yeah.
It was the original stuff, and it was such a small print run as well. I think I paid £30-something for it, but I really wanted it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's the type of thing that I will, if it's physical media, I will buy. Definitely original soundtracks that are very, very hard to get hold of, or have had really short or really small runs. So you reckon Discogs is the site to do that?
It's absolutely perfect for that. The other thing that Discogs does do as well, it will bring, you can see reasonably comprehensive data on how much people have been paying for the specific album that you're looking at over the last 12 months or so. You can see highest, lowest, median, and get a rough handle on how many have been sold. And that's quite handy as well, because there are times, specifically with albums like you're talking about there, which are quite rare, where it may be that at any one time there's only sort of one item for sale, and when there's only one of them, the price is set basically by someone just sticking their finger in the wind and going, that might work. So it's much more useful to see what did the last person pay for a copy of this, because it's quite possible, and it cuts both ways for sellers as well. It's quite possible that someone might have overpaid for the last time, and you aren't going to get that again. Equally, if there's a firm pattern emerging after 30 or 40 sales, that should be what you should be paying when you take condition into account as well.
Okay, so that's physical formats. Let's have a look at streaming. So in your opinion, because I've been using some streaming services, so we'll see how we compare here, which ones would you recommend?
I still believe if you you have some some interest in the quality of what you're listening to, that Tidal is the best, but equally you are paying handsomely for the privilege. For convenience and cross-board compatibility, Spotify, and then after that, for me, it's just everyone else. It may be that you get a good subscription deal through, it's like a number of times for example, I mean, in this case it's Spotify, but that's bundled with time subscriptions and so on and so forth. So if you get a screaming good deal for another service offered to you, they are all pretty much of a muchness. So I'd say Tidal has a qualitative advantage and Spotify has this massive compatibility advantage, but they're all pulling from almost identical libraries, and the difference in the compressed sound formats is not night and day. Yep. So really it comes down to whichever one you've got a cracking deal on. But I do find the fact that Spotify works across so many different things now to be very, very useful.
I mean, I would have got rid of it for Tidal, but there's just not so many devices it's supported on. So
no,
I keep my Spotify subscription for that reason.
Yeah, I mean,
I can't be asked cancelling it. I've just forgotten.
No, I mean, I say I've given Spotify quite a lot of money over the years, but I mean, Tidal's getting there. I mean, they are clearly on a compatibility drive. I mean, my name streamer, as and when I can be bothered to update the firmware, will now support Tidal natively. And they do seem to be on a charm offensive across lots and lots of different devices. So they do have ambitions in this regard. It's interesting that that's Tidal's route to growing their subscription base. The French service Qobuz, which is also lossless, they don't seem to be as interested in getting onto other pieces of platform. But equally, where Qobuz really comes into its own is the download store that's attached to it. It's probably the best collection of lossless material you can choose from in the UK. It's absolutely brilliant and not unreasonably priced, if I'm honest, as well.
So how does Qobuz work? Is that free, but you pay for your downloads?
Qobuz is subscription only. It's exactly the same. It's lossless. It's exactly the same as Tidal. It's 20 quid for the lossless service or less for the compressed version. But then completely set, you can download, like you could download the Spotify or the Tidal desktop apps. There's a Qobuz one as well. But equally, if you just go to the Qobuz website, you can then buy a large amount of the music as a physical as something that you own and can be used in whichever way you see fit, and that can be bought at various compression levels between MP3 and then all the way up to, in the case of quite a few albums, a high res version. Cool. So if you want, I mean, for example, because it's I mean, obviously most people have bought the album already if they wanted to, but the last Daft Punk album, Random Access Memories, they've got the 2488.2 kilohertz version of that as a something you can buy, and that does sound bloody marvelous. So it's quite an interesting option to have, and it's no more painful than buying anything off Amazon, really, and with the added advantage that as soon as you've paid your money, your download starts, and depending on the speed of your internet connection, the album will be with you inside of, well, rarely more than 10 minutes.
It's funny that we're having this conversation, guys, and none of us have mentioned Apple yet, who, if you think back, were probably the company that kind of pushed all this on with the original iTunes and so on, yet we're not mentioning them here for some strange reason.
I think at some stage or another, almost everyone's bought something on iTunes. I bought 2 specific tracks for my wedding day, so they were available on various devices to do background music. But that's the only thing I've ever bought. I don't like paying out to buy compressed music, and then Apple Music. Of us, unless Hodge is about to spring a surprise on it, I thought Withers was the only person of us that had actually gone in for the free trial, and I pinged him on Skype when earlier on when the 3-month subscription free trial period for Apple Music is at an end now. So if you haven't cancelled, you will now start to pay for it. What was interesting is that Steve is the only person I've spoken to who's retaining his sub. Everyone else, another 7 or 8 people I've spoken to, are all just knocking it on the head. Most of them are going back to Spotify. I think I can convince one of them to at least give Tidal a whirl, but they're not staying with Apple Music. And it would appear that the iTunesy sort of interface that Apple Music uses, I mean, there is nothing you could do to persuade me to install iTunes on this PC. So
I've done that this week. I've had to, because my daughter's getting an iPod for a birthday, and I tell you, it's never run so badly. It's shocking on Friday. I'm going to have to uninstall it and put it on a dedicated machine. It's that bad. It's terrible.
Yeah. I'm fully aware that it works better on Macs, as you would bloody hope it would. But one of the things I like, both Tidal and Spotify have got very well sorted desktop browsers, desktop apps. And if Apple Music is sort of tying itself to a piece of software which, by the nature of how it's evolved and all the different things it has to do, is just not a particularly great piece of music management software, then I'm afraid I'm not going to play, and I'm certainly not going to hand them any money for it.
Okay, so we've covered physical, we've covered streaming. Okay, to wrap up, Ed, we're going to hand the baton to you. Give us 2 recent releases that people must go and listen to because you think they're absolutely brilliant.
Ooh, the new Churches album. That's Churches with a V for some reason.
Yeah, cracking album. Really enjoyed that.
The first album was blinding. This new album is wonderful as well. It's Every Open Eye, I believe is what it's called. I actually haven't got around to ordering my copy yet. I was going to wait until I'd finished one enormous credit card bill and then kick another one into life. And then after that, hold on a second, let me bring up, what have I bought recently that was... I have to be honest, I received... as part of that high-res site I was speaking to earlier, there's the new Dave Gilmour one, Rattle That Lock, but I didn't get in any way excited about that. I'm sorry. It really is the very definition of dad rock. If you want to buy a Dave Gilmour album, I accidentally, because I had to listen to it on Spotify, I got listening to Dave Gilmour's first ever solo album, which was done in 1977, and it's imaginatively called David Gilmour. But that's really good. So if you're going to buy one of them, just go and buy that one because it'll cost you less money as well. And Dave Gilmour still gets paid. Everyone's a winner. So with that in mind, we'll ignore that. The other album I've been listening to, and I've got to admit it's a bit of a grower, is the new New Order album. They are still at it, and it's pretty good actually. It's called Music Complete, and I've been enjoying that. It's got some proper New Ordery moments to it, and it's a lot of fun to listen to. So I'm actually umming and ahhing whether to buy that on vinyl. I will be ordering the Churches one on analog because I'm sad, and I've got the other one on vinyl. So you might as well have a matching set. One last thing, I had some beer over the weekend. Anyone that used to play the Wipeout games on the PlayStation, the anti-gravity things, a lot of the soundtracks for that were done by a bloke. I can't remember its name, but he recorded under the name of Cold Storage. And brilliantly, he was persuaded to tidy them all up, remaster them, and you can download them actually mostly for free. If you go to a website called Bandcamp, so that's bandcamp.com, and do a search for Cold Storage, you can bring up all of these albums and you can download them for gratis, and brilliantly nostalgic listening to those things. And actually, I mean, obviously Bandcamp is another, that's something, maybe a discussion for another time, because for me it's early days in Bandcamp's existence, but that is actually the future of music retail. And I think one of the discussions we'll have to have is whether it then has any mileage as a means of selling and distributing movies, because it's the artist interacting directly with the general public. Well,
we'll have to come back to that conversation on another day, because that, sadly, is all the time we have for the podcast. We made it an hour, people. We made it. Yeah, Steve didn't even say a word. All I need to do is thank Mark Hodgkinson.
The fat man walks alone.
And Ed Selley.
We mustn't dwell. No, not today. We can't. Not on Rex Manning Day.
And this has been a very Ed-heavy podcast, but thank you very much, Ed. I've actually learnt some stuff today, and you've given me some ideas to go and buy some albums, so thanks very much for that.
Give us 5 stars, love us unconditionally.
Yeah, we'll
see you in 2 weeks' time.
I forgot to go and look today, so apologies, but if you've left us 5 stars, we'll read your name out. Not next week, we're back again on the 21st of October, and until then, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again very soon.